Everything is personal right here. Everything is personal right here.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another episode of Everything is Personal. We have a special guest all the way from my hometown, Philadelphia, PA, Mr. Mina Mishrikey, who is the senior, don't get it confused, the senior partner at Merida Capital, right? So Mina, senior, does that have anything to do with like age? Do they go from age group and senior? Or is that an actual title that you
Well,
married?
there is a correlation, but I've actually dropped that entirely. I think it's just nonsense. So I just call myself a partner.
All right.
We work for Mitch Barukowitz, who who's been a guest on your pod, and he runs a very flat organization, and so none of these titles mean much. But Mitch and I work closely together, and I run the investment team, and it's an honor to be on this podcast with a fellow Philadelphian at a time when Philadelphia is peaking right now. Big weekend coming up with the Phillies and the Eagles, and the Sixers starting their season next year. So I'm sure we could geek out on that, but
I'll be happy to talk about that. I mean, it's so amazing. The Eagles, like so I live in LA, and you can see people walking around with Eagles stuff on it, and you're just sort of, once in a while you're encouraging one another, hey, Eagles. And I didn't see that before in LA as much as I do now. There's also an Eagles bar that you can go
in Santa
to
Monica.
Santa Monica. Yeah. And there's a Temple bar. So I went to Temple, and like Temple people get together and now watch Eagles games because we have a Temple alum that plays for the Eagles. So it's a big deal too.
Son Reddick, of course.
Yeah. So awesome, man. That's great.
I will say just one last. I won't bore people with football, but I'm a season ticket holder, and I take my 9-year-old son to every game, and we sit in the upper deck. And there's something very special about the joy that it brings him, despite the curse words and drunks that are around him at every game. But it's good. It's good education for him.
Well, so all right, I used to go to Veteran Stadium and sit in the 700 level. And last time, it's been years, but since I've been to the Link, and I was there when it first opened, I didn't find the same energy. Sitting in the 700 level, that is different.
It's not the same. You had the real experience, and those were the good old days.
I have a couple of stories really quick since we're getting into it. So there was two guys I remember. One of them was a guy that would burn all the team's hats, and he would put them on a rope. So he had all these hats, and he would, as we're beating the team, he would burn the hat and then, do all the Eagle stuff. And then Dallas games were the worst, obviously, because I don't understand why people would ever wear any Dallas gear to the vet, which was crazy. At the time that they had Seamus, the judge that was in the basement of the vet, so they could kind of process people as they get arrested. And I remember this one guy, and he was talking smack, and they pummeled him, and then they took his sneaker, and it was just like a trophy. Everybody was parading with his shoe. So that's a 700 level. It was insane.
Sounds about right. I think you have a richer crowd now. There's still, if you wear an opposing team's jersey, you're going to be, called an a-hole and, the slurry of other things. But it doesn't really get serious. And, people that are worried about wearing whatever jersey whatever team they support into the stadium, it doesn't really matter anymore, except for Cowboys weekend. And I would say the New York Giants weekend, and maybe to a lesser extent not the Redskins, the Commanders.
What a dumb name, by the way.
Well, yeah, it is what it is. So it's funny. The Phillies are playing the Braves, and they're doing the tomahawk chant. And I'm thinking to myself, why haven't people come down on that? But anyways,
or the Chiefs. There you go. They do the same thing. Okay, so let's get into you and introducing you to our audience. Where did you actually grow up?
So I grew up not too far from you in Northeast Philly in Oxford Circle. And first generation, parents had a small veterinary clinic. American dream. Came to parents came to this money with came to this country with no money and made something of themselves and went to high school in the burbs. Grew up playing against Kobe Bryant. We were arch rivals in high school and graduated together, played against each other for 5 or 6 years, and knew him pretty well. So that's really my claim to fame. And then played college ball at Penn and eventually into the banking world, which is a boring story, but wasn't fulfilled, and decided to enter the cannabis industry in 2016. So it's been some
Did,
time.
did you have any siblings, or do you
Two
have any
younger
siblings?
two younger brothers, and um, and they both outshine me. One's a wires airplanes and aircrafts, and he went to MIT, and the other is a teacher, and doing God's work, and is getting his graduate degree EHD at Columbia University. So good kids.
Very
But
cool.
I'm the oldest, and I hang it over their heads.
So, childhood wise, so I know where you grew up. I used to live in Fox Chase, and I used to live in
Mhm.
Northeast and Fox Chase, and I moved to Bucks County. That's where you sort of migrate there, in my sort of neighborhood. But did you live like above where your parents' business was?
Oh yeah, we grew up on top of the animal clinic, and my job growing up was to clean the kennel and to go around the neighborhood and pick up newspapers, that so that we could bring that back to the kennel and use that on the bottom of the kennels for the small dogs and cats. So that was my upbringing.
Yeah, so I was going to say, I mean, it must have instilled some work ethic in you. Did you have, so I guess two types of questions. Did you have any aspirations for going into that industry when you were a kid? Or were you like, that's exactly what I don't want to do when I grow up because it's such a pain in the ass of cleaning, dog shit, basically?
A little of both. So being first generation, families from Egypt, and I was always raised to go into medicine or engineering. Just very typical. And my experience, with my parents, actually, my father, he wasn't a great communicator, and so being a vet was perfect for him. You didn't have to talk to his patients, and he just had a way with connecting with animals, in a way that, was really special. Um, but he always pushed me to against going into the veterinary business. He wanted me to be a doctor. At the time, the thesis was, oh, you can make a lot more money being a doctor, and you're smart enough, and that's what you should focus on. I never want you to be a veterinarian, and so he kind of pushed me away from it. And of course, cleaning up shit when I was growing up didn't help either. But so when I got to Penn, when I got to college, you know, it took a couple weeks of biology. My thought was I was going to be pre-med, and didn't have a lot of confidence in myself,
Mhm.
and kind of just decided, what, this isn't for me. I'm not going to make it. More, not that I didn't want to do it, but more, I just felt like I didn't have, the fortitude to get through,
Yeah.
the whole process. And, it's a long process, of course. And, looking back on it, I think there's nothing more noble than helping people. And, now I'm just I'm a finance professional, and I'm helping people in my own ways. Um, yeah, which I think, feels so special to be part of the cannabis industry, because there's a more direct way to help folks in my seat.
Yeah.
But part of me is always thinks, I wish I had gone down that path. Um, and that's why I feel fortunate to be at an investment shop that focuses on the medicalization of the space. And that's of course why we're working together, and I'm sure we'll get into all that. But yeah.
But you said something interesting about lack of confidence and fortitude and that stamina to be able to succeed. But, there's a couple things. First of all, you were an athlete and you were, a good athlete to play against Kobe and then make it to playing in college. That's one. Number two, you also got into Penn, which is a great school. It's very difficult to get into. So what was that like? What was that voice in your head that was saying to you, "I've achieved so much. I'm a high achiever already." What was that voice that was saying to you, "You're just not good enough to make it there," or did you just not have the passion for it to kind of pull you through those lulls?
Well, first of all, very kind of you to say that Kobe averaged about 30 to 40 points every game he played me, and I sat the bench in college, so wasn't that good. But I think more than anything, I might have been, I don't know, drinking and smoking a lot of cannabis, and maybe that was part of it. I don't know. I don't think I had a passion to learn when I was in college like I do now. And I think that's probably the biggest factor.
So it's interesting. I love to learn, but I hate to study. And college and high school, it just wasn't for me. The way that I was taught didn't really connect to me unless I really was passionate about a class. So I remember like there were certain classes I went to, and I went to three different high schools and all this other stuff. But certain classes I could sit there and partially because of my ADD, but partially because the way you're being taught things. If I'm not stimulated, I'm not connected to that, I'm not interested. I won't learn, even though I want to. And in college, same thing, but it was better because I got to choose some classes. So I had like this one class called Intellectual Heritage at Temple, which taught about all the different religions, all the different theologies, and I was like, this is cool. I'm interested in that. I want to learn, and the learning came easier because I was interested in that. Or there was another class about deviant behavior. So I'm like, oh, I get to experience what serial killers think about and learn about that. But so the passion of learning is there. It's the way that you're being taught. And one more example, like books. So I love books. I love consuming books, but reading is not the way that I like to consume books. I used to read like 3 books at a time because I'd get bored with one and I'd start falling asleep and pick up another one. But audiobooks, man, that just opened things up for me. I inhale those things. I can't stop. I'm hiking, I'm at the gym, anytime, I'm just listening to stuff. So was it more that you weren't, and obviously cannabis and partying, all that takes some of that, but was it more like the way that you have a passion for learning, it's just not the way that you're being taught, studying, or you just said, hey, this isn't something that I'm really interested in pursuing?
I think it's interesting. It's an interesting question because it's something my wife and I debate all the time because we have 3 kids and they're I grew up, first generation, went to school, came home, had a tutor outside of school, was just just very rote and dry. And kind of got used to that and was able to succeed just by sticking to it. And my kids are getting a progressive education right now, and really the focus is really helping them find their passion and focusing on that and channeling that as an avenue to learn, which sounds like would have been great for you as a child. And it's something I struggle with too, because I'm like, like they're teaching them different methodologies, long addition. They're going from the left to the right, and then they're going from the right to the left. And my kid doesn't know how to carry the one and go from the right to the left. And what are they doing? And but what they're trying to do, and what I'm slowly understanding is they're trying to teach kids. Not only, I mean, some kids aren't passionate about math, but they're obviously focusing on their passions and leveraging that. But also, on some of these kind of drier topics, it's all about learning things in different ways and allowing them to bring logic into the equation in a way that I wasn't taught when I was growing up.
Right.
And I appreciate that now because you see this bass guitar in the background. I picked this up late in life. And I'm teaching myself this now, and it's very much going through that process that my kids are going through. And I get it. It's not how I grew up, but I understand it. I think to go back to your original question, I think the biggest issue that I had was it took me, 40 years to find what I was passionate about. And I couldn't find what that thing was. And Wharton and Penn was very much just a default. Business was just a default. It was just, this is, people can make money in this world, and I don't really know what it's about, but I'm pretty good at math, and I can figure things out, and maybe I just default to this and see where it goes. I mean, that's really what it was, and it took me a long time to figure out. I felt like when I was on Wall Street, I felt like I was acting in a way, right? I was, kind of filling a role that wasn't necessarily me. And every Sunday I would get a case of the scary Sundays, and then you get to work on Monday, and you start that that role again. And I don't get that anymore. I love what I do, and it's a different kind of pressure. But it took a long time to find that passion, and I think that that's why I have an appreciation for this progressive education, is trying to hone in on helping kids find that passion early. Would have been so beneficial to me too.
Yeah, I have a very similar kind of trajectory in life. So you went from Penn to, was it Deutsche Bank, or did you have
a bunch of places in between, but I had a long stint at Deutsche Bank, and yeah.
So I went to Price Waterhouse at the time, before it was PwC. And like what you just described was, I felt so out of place, but I was connected. I'm like, well, I'm making a paycheck, I'm buying a house, I'm doing this, but I felt so out of place because I used to have long hair, and I wear earrings and all this stuff, and I put my hair in a ponytail, put on a suit, and it was just so not me. But what I realized, and then working for a venture capital company, then doing commercial real estate, being a broker, and doing what I'm passionate about now, I always knew in the back of my head that I had passions, like things that I did no matter what. Like cannabis was huge for me, music was huge for me, but I just never actually thought, I'm like, how do I merge those two together? But all those experiences that I went through at PW and commercial real estate and all that stuff, I know there's bits and pieces of all that stuff that I use now in business, which I'm actually passionate about what I do. And it's because, helping people and giving back, all the things that you talked about. But if I didn't have those experiences, I may not be in the same position I am now, not only find my passion, but because that experience is global. Like you're taking bits and pieces of everything else that you did, and you're putting it into your passion. And I think that helps you be more successful. There's a lot of people who are passionate about music and are playing at bars around LA all the time. And it's great. And they still have to, fix whatever mailboxes on the side to make ends meet. And they may be happy. But if they had a business acumen that they developed throughout their journey, maybe they could have put that into what they're passionate about and accelerated, their growth and success. So I don't know. I am a believer in finding your passion, but I'm also a believer in this journey is not a straight line. It's like there's zigzags across the board. And if you can take little bits and pieces of that and implement that into your passion, and make it accelerate much quicker.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And I think a mistake a lot of people make is they think obviously it's natural for us to focus on money and how can we provide for our family and maximize being successful. But if you don't have passion underlying it, you're just going to set yourself up for failure.
So your experience, how did you go from Deutsche Bank to cannabis? Or was that like I read somewhere that Deutsche Bank didn't want people to invest. And by the way, not just them, and I'm not singling them out. There's a lot of the financial services companies at the time that they wanted you to divest from investments that may be perceived under FINRA as risky investments. So if you were just to buy cannabis stock and you're part of that company, they wouldn't allow you to own that. Was that the case at the time that you were at Deutsche Bank, and what was the
Well,
sort of transition?
it's a long story, but I effectively was unceremoniously fired because I participated in an application.
Yeah.
My start in the cannabis world was I put a Pennsylvania legalized medical
Mm.
in 2016. I didn't own any cannabis stocks. There wasn't really any cannabis stocks back then. There were some, but and I was working at Deutsche Bank. I was structuring complex derivatives. I was some there, there's some shared experiences that I took from that and I brought into the cannabis world, but completely different worlds. Um, and I saw this opportunity. One of the guys that I played basketball with at Penn and I decided let's form a group and put together a license or an application for a license. And if we get it, great. And if we don't, then we tried. And so, every bank, every broker dealer has strict outside business interest policies. I disclosed, that, I was putting together this application and they said, no, you can't because, the reason was just nothing specific other than they didn't want any of their employees involved in that space because they didn't want to inherit reputational risk,
Yeah.
which is BS, but whatever. So, effectively my understanding was that, that there was nothing wrong with applying for a license. And if I got a license, then I'd have to make a decision with my life. And I was ready to make that decision. So we applied for the license. We didn't get it. Life moves on. It was a very difficult way to start the cannabis experience, but a very valuable one in terms of helping me to run one of the largest PE and VC shops in the space and
Mm.
understand that experience. And it's a big part of what Merida does now is apply for these de novo licenses
Mm.
and build these businesses from scratch. And in fact, I lost to Merida. They didn't know at the time, but I lost to Merida, and it goes to show you that sometimes it's not about the strength of your application, but I wanted to squeeze that one in less Mitch hears this podcast, but um, so everything was moved on with life, and I guess the company found out that I had applied, and they effectively used it as an excuse to terminate me, even though I had no business interest because there was no business. So that's the boring story. It put me into a pretty dark place as I was transitioning into, a world where I was outside of, kind of the white suit banking industry. Didn't have much on my resume that would help me, outside of that space. I was living in
Mm.
Philadelphia. The world is much smaller in Philadelphia in the finance realm. And actually was talking to a bunch of venture capital and private equity platforms in the area, in the Philadelphia area, and I had a pretty I guess impactful meeting with a guy who is a partner at a local firm, a very powerful person, and he was doing me a favor by meeting me effectively, and he basically said to me, look, you're 40 years old. You've spent your job on the sell side, and we would never hire somebody like you. The only reason we hire people is number one because they're young and cheap, and there's a very traditional path in finance where you graduate from college and you work 120 hours a week in banking, and then after that kind of 2 or 3 year period, you might go get an MBA, which I never did. For another reason, we'll talk about that. That's another story. But you go get your MBA, you come out of your MBA, and you join a private equity or venture capital firm, or you make a switch at that early age when you're cheap to one of those platforms, and that's the rest of your career. And if you miss that boat, then you miss that boat, right? And so he kind of was framing it as like, you're not young and cheap, and you don't have, the only reason we would hire somebody kind of more advanced is if they had a particular industry expertise. And this was back in 2017, and he said, the industry that you care about and you're most passionate about is cannabis, and that's not a real thing. And it sort of set off a light bulb in my head, like, well, you don't think it's a real thing, but I beg to differ. And so that led me to a path of getting to the seat that I'm at today.
It's a great story. I love it because there's so many different nuggets in there. Number one is that when you don't want to be there in the first place, and subconsciously and energetically, if you believe in that or not, you took the route to get you out of there into something else. I'm sure it was difficult and stuff, because I went through different jobs where I was laid off, or they couldn't afford me anymore and all that stuff. But I didn't care because I did at the time. But now looking back at it, I wasn't supposed to be there in the first place. And then the other thing is, in terms of the cannabis industry not being a real industry, and in expertise. So when I was in commercial real estate, I got into this company, a really small company in Lansdale, and this broker who was running it, he took me out to lunch, and he goes, "Look around you. You see every building here? I either sold or leased this building. I have no kids. I have no wife. I have nobody. I want to mentor you." I'm like, man, this is a dream. I come in, and he gives me the Yellow Pages. For you kids, it used to be a book called the Yellow Pages that, it wasn't the internet. It was you have to go and look up numbers. And he's like, good old fashioned shoe leather. So I got lucky. I got my first deal like in a month and a half or 2 months. I made like $10,000 or $15,000. I'm like, I'm going to kill it in real estate. I did not sell another thing for another year. Luckily, I had some savings. I was like, wow, this isn't. And I remember he told me one thing. He goes, you know what? Maybe you find a specialty, specialize in something. And I remember I got this gas station listing, and I had no idea about remediation or gas stations, none. But so I struggled, and I just created myself a niche. And I said, I'll be the gas station guy. And there I had an expertise. So you're absolutely right in that having an expertise in a big industry is definitely a way to be able to differentiate yourself from other people. And your experience in the banking industry probably helps a lot in the work that you do now. So what makes or how do you measure what a good investment is now that you're with Merida? Is there a sort of, I know you guys have a committee because I learned about that when I was talking to Mitch, but also besides that, are there certain criteria that are intangible criteria, or is there like a checklist that you go through? All right, you have to have this much revenue, et cetera, to make a decision.
Well, Mitch claims that there's a 130 point checklist and rubric that is only in his head and none of us have ever seen. But I'm sure it exists. But I think it's a process. I think first of all, there's lots of good investments, and there's lots of good investments that we say no to all the time. And there's nothing more challenging, especially right now, than raising money and being an entrepreneur and sticking your neck out and doing the riskiest thing that somebody can do, which is follow their passion, start a business, and sell yourself to others and try to raise capital. So I have so much respect for all the entrepreneurs that we meet. We are also entrepreneurs. We're also building our own business. We are also constantly raising money and deploying money, and there's a lack of institutional capital in this space. So we very much go through the same thing day in and day out that the entrepreneurs that are pitching us to invest in them, we go through the same thing. So, I think it's important to point out because, people come to us and they pitch their deals and they think we're, you know, Goldilocks sitting on a pile of cash. And it's just not true in the cannabis space. It will be true at some point, but it is not true in the cannabis space yet. And it's not true for anyone. And we've gone from 0 to 400 million of assets under management, which is not a lot by traditional investment standards. But it is big in the cannabis space because, it's a bunch of high net worth individuals and family offices, and the institutional conversations are happening, but that'll, accelerate once federal legalization or progress in that direction happens. And that's why, right now is a very interesting time after the Biden announcement last week. But I'll pivot back to your question, which is we are thematic investors and we invest in all parts of the cannabis space. And it starts with the theme. Is this an area that we want to invest in? And is this a puzzle piece that fits with one of the 75 other portfolio companies that we already have invested in? Which makes us, probably one of the most prolific portfolios in the space just by sheer number of portfolio companies we have. And that is surprisingly a very, very big factor. I mean, of course, there's the normal stuff like, can this business grow? Do we believe in, the financial returns and the potential return to our investors over time? Is the management team, responsible, and, have they built businesses before? Have they failed before? That is, something that we look for actually is failure. I went through it personally. We all have been through it personally. And, if you meet an entrepreneur that's never failed, then, it's almost like, what are they hiding here? But to go back to theme, we're really focused on a couple big themes, and I don't want to make this conversation about Merida, but certainly, a big theme for us is the medicalization of this industry. Right now, medical marijuana is kind of a misnomer. I don't have to tell you that. Obviously, full disclosure, we've invested in your business and are very proud to have done so. But the paradigm of people biohacking kind of blindly and depending on, the bud tender to, kind of make medical decisions, that's got to evolve, especially as we enter into a world where insurance reimbursement becomes a reality, can become a reality for Medicaid patients in New York starting April 1st, 2023. The investors see the writing on the wall. They see the cost savings relative to, what they've been spending on the opioid crisis. And it's all about economics for them at the end of the day, right? And so as we professionalize, as traditional healthcare comes into this space, how are we positioned for that? That's number one, a big theme for us. The other, kind of two other big themes I'll bring up now is the industrial applications of the hemp fiber. It sequesters more carbon from the atmosphere than any plant in the world, bar none. You take an acre of the Amazon forest and you take an acre of hemp, that acre of hemp will sequester twice as much carbon from the atmosphere than the Amazon forest. The only thing that sequesters more carbon from the atmosphere is our oceans. And that's not something people know. And the fiber is very strong. It's strong, and it can be used for so many industrial use cases, whether it's, the lining of door panels for BMWs and Mercedes and for certain models right now, whether it's textiles as a more sustainable replacement for cotton that uses a lot of water to process, or whether it's one of our companies making biodegradable wet wipes and diapers and feminine hygiene products. All those products are 90% petroleum based synthetic materials.
Mhm.
You wouldn't know it. You use it once, you throw it away, it sits in the dump for thousands of years.
Yeah,
Um, and
and the things like hempcrete, right?
and construction
Yeah,
applications in our portfolio. I could go on and on, but there's, the commonality between the medical side and the industrial side, obviously very different. But we like investments where there's a huge total addressable market,
mm,
much bigger than the total addressable market of people getting stoned,
yes,
which we invest into, but much bigger than that, right? And, kind of getting as close, to those, kind of the root, the platform, the supply chain, the boring stuff of of those themes and investing in them, and kind of the analogy is, it's like the Dick Cheney analogy, it's, shooting, going, shooting, bird pellets from, a foot away, right?
yeah,
And then so those are kind of the areas that we like them, which we're most excited about. Of course, there's other areas. There's advertising technology as the industry, comes out of the shadows of, not being able to market their
yeah,
businesses appropriately on the Instagrams and the Facebooks of the world, and building data aggregators that will monetize that shift into normal advertising channels. That's another theme. Genetics is another big area that
yeah.
we focus on. So themes are where we start, and then if you fit within that theme, and you look like a business that is removing a friction from the system, um, then and as a puzzle piece with our other portfolio companies. That's sort of the kind of holy trinity of what we
Right.
look for.
And then Mitch's checklist comes in after that.
And then that magical checklist comes in.
When you were talking about Dick Cheney, I thought you were going to bring up when Sacha Baron Cohen had him sign his waterboarding, like water can. I don't know if you ever seen that. He had this
I never
show.
saw that.
Yeah, he has a show. I don't. I'm going to butcher the name. Somebody will correct it, but it's called like "This Is America" or something like that on Showtime. So he's in character as a like is an IDF Israeli Special Forces guy, and he's interviewing Dick Cheney and he's high fiving him about all the waterboarding, and he had him sign his waterboarding canister or whatever you call it, when it pours water. And he was so proud to do it too. It's just fantastic. I highly recommend it. Super funny
That
show.
actually happened. Wow. Unbelievable.
It actually happened. It's hysterical. So speaking of capital markets and all that, do you think that COVID had something to do with this capital market? Sort of, uh, how do I put this question? Uh, there was a lot of investment in the cannabis space. There was there's so many different green rushes that have come and gone, but there was a lot of investment in the space. There's a lot of companies that went public. There was SPAC
Mhm.
deals. There's all these things, and then all of a sudden it tightened up. Is it a combination of like COVID or these stocks plummeting or expectations that things were going to go, legal and they didn't? Is it one or all these different things? What are your thoughts about what kind of happened?
Well, look, there's a lot of, and as my daughter comes in the background, hey, honey.
I
uh, yeah. Sorry, Len, 1 second.
Yeah,
Okay, here you go. Sorry about that. Um, there's been a lot of ups and downs in this industry. You know, going back to that conversation I had with that venture capitalist who said the cannabis thing isn't real.
yeah,
A year later, he was calling me, asking me, about what we were doing in the space, and not necessarily how he could get involved, but kind of, picking my brain because, they
right.
had thoughts within their platform of gaining some exposure, which I found, um, you know, a bit validating. But you know, Canada legalizing, going federal, that created a lot of excitement. We didn't invest in in Canada by and large. We are actually now on the industrial side, but we
Mm.
didn't invest in any Canadian LPs because we saw, just kind of a rush of capital. And, right now we're going through a difficult time in the industry because there's not enough capital, and I'll get to why in a second. But the only thing that is potentially worse for businesses is too much capital. And that's, a lot of what you saw in Canada was too much capital, and businesses, building to a scale that was well in excess of what the market demanded, and especially when you take into account the illicit market. And that really caused a lot of those businesses to implode. The US market has been much healthier because there's been, a very methodical growth on a state by state basis, slowly, and certain states have had more mature regulatory regimes than others, and California certainly has, kind of been the poster child of how not to build an industry. Whereas, some of the medical oriented states, particularly, back east where I'm at, and the Rust Belt, have had a little bit more, of a measured approach to how to grow these industries. And what you've seen is a lot of growth in a very short period of time. And then you brought up COVID. In COVID, that growth was accelerated because, it turns out when people were home, they wanted to consume a lot of cannabis. And
it was essential. And it was essential.
And it was essential. And we have, kind of demand has come back down to pre-COVID levels, which is not surprising, right? And so you kind of had this spike, and a lot of businesses, and we were cognizant of this when we were investing at the time. A lot of businesses were raising money to support growth based on a higher baseline that was not a reality. And so that has, caused a lot of businesses to overshoot in their ambitions relative to, what the demand is. But I think the biggest factor, and that's kind of minor, actually, minor relative to the two other big points that I'll bring up now, which is if you look at cannabis stocks and when they peaked, it was February 2021, when the night that the Georgia Senate runoffs happened, and it became clear that the Senate was going to take control of the Senate. And the thought was federal legalization is going to happen. Like, this is, democratically controlled Senate. We've got Biden. He made some promises, and, away we go. And so that was literally the peak of every cannabis stock. And since then, it's been a slow and steady decline because a lot of institutional investors, and I know hedge funds in the space that were investing in some of these MSOs, that was their thesis, right? And as it became evident that this is going to take longer, and betting on politicians to live up to their promises is not necessarily a good investment thesis, they pulled out. And these cannabis stocks, and thankfully we're largely we invest in private companies, and we have some public exposure because we have sold some of our private companies to the publics, but the public companies already were dealing with, very low volumes because they're, the US companies are, trading on Canadian exchanges where there's no liquidity. So if you had a Robinhood account, you couldn't buy any cannabis stocks, right? And so if a big hedge fund gets out of the space, it's going to have a huge impact on the stock price. And so that kind of predated sort of this macro environment that we're in, right? We're entering into a recession, and that is a much bigger factor on the cannabis industry than I think people think, because cannabis is just viewed as a risk asset, and every single risk asset has been red this year. The only thing that's gone up is gas prices, right? And oil, right? That's the only thing that's gone up. I mean, even bonds, which are supposed to be a risk off asset,
right,
have had their worst performance in decades. And so, you already have a capital constrained uh, environment and market,
Mm.
and it wasn't that cannabis stocks were overpriced. They were already, kind of selling off into, the end of last year and the beginning of this year when all
Mm.
this kind of macro implosion started. So it wasn't that they were overpriced like Silicon Valley investments, but
Mm.
you already had a capital constrained market because you don't have institutional investors in the
Right.
space, right? You don't have banks lending into these businesses,
Mm.
and then on top of that, you're bucketed with um, the rest, everything else in the world that's going down, right? And
Yeah.
and so that has really caused a lot of investors that want to come into this space, and we have institutional investor conversations every day, and there's a lot of interest. But the thing we hear is, why do we want to come into this space unless there's some movement on the federal regulatory regime and legalization. And this might be the bottom, but why do I want to stick my neck out and guess when the bottom is, and and invest in this space now until there's a little bit more clarity on some of the headwinds that the industry is facing. And so that's why last week
Yeah.
is pretty big, even though you know you know Biden didn't really do anything that uh, has immediate impact on the industry, but it has changed the mood in terms of investors looking at this space and starting to gain exposure to this space because it's a high growth industry.
Yeah.
Even if you have growth in certain markets going down a little bit, um, and high growth in other markets, and being a regulatory expert on which states and countries do you want exposure to is really important. But even though there's a little bit of noise there, you still have the illegal market that's 3 times, 4 times the size of the legal market,
Mm.
and that transition of those consumers, which are already there consuming cannabis products, and that's ignoring all the, kind of industrial applications that I'm so fond about. As that transition happens, the, the growth will follow. And so I think people realize that, but, it's all about, I think federal policy movement, and, you saw it in the stock prices last week that
Yeah.
were up 30 and 40% on that day.
So there is a light at the end in the tunnel now, at least as you mentioned the mood, and I agree with you, like the action that he took is nothing, but the tone that he used, I think, and in me having conversations with people are like, oh, it seems like there's going to be movement. I personally am not sure if there's anything going to be done during this administration. Lame duck midterm election. It was a nice gesture, but at least there is, the attitude is starting to change and there's some hope. But also, you guys have investments in picks and shovel companies that don't really touch the planet in any way. So it doesn't really make that much of a difference. But I think it does in attitude as far as the overall investment criteria goes. And correct?
Yeah, I think that, look, we do have a lot of investments in companies. Actually, most of our investments are in companies that don't touch the plant. But
Right.
you know, uh, those businesses grow as the industry grows. So it all helps. Mitch and I uh, debate, the politics all the time, and we're generally in agreement here, which is what happens next is what matters. It's not what he was said last week. It's what happens next. You know, um, there's some people that are a little bit more conspiratorial in terms of the timing of the announcement right before the midterm elections. And, the last time he was making promises was also going into an election. And, I tend to be a half glass full guy. I think it increases the chances of the Safe Banking Act passing in December.
Mm.
If that doesn't happen, then it might take a long time for anything to happen. And I think it's a bipartisan issue, and I think
Mm.
Nancy Mace has taken a leadership role, and there's a very good chance that we have a Republican controlled Congress for the next 2 years. And I actually think that they might very well take this over the finish line. Maybe not federal legalization, but some of the baby steps to get there, like a safe banking. But I think December would be crucial, and what happens in December will be crucial. And am I betting my life that that continued progress will happen in December? No, but I'm paying very close attention now.
So, do you have any input into Merida's social media posts at all?
Well, Twitter is Mitch.
Right.
I do have some influence, but it's sort of like taming a wild animal. I'm effectively our LinkedIn voice, at least
Okay.
my personal account. But yeah, it's if you want me to push for a certain post, let me know. But I may have limited powers.
I think it's super entertaining. The Twitter posts are great. So I just didn't know if there. Mitch said that there is a group, but I read them, and I believe that there probably is mostly, if not all, Mitch, because it sounds like his tone.
Yeah, I mean, just imagine this. It's actually a tamed down Mitch. So, but he tells it like it is. I mean,
Yeah,
and I give him credit for that. He's
100%.
very, very passionate, and he was, you know, we were very early in saying that this legalization thing was going to take longer than people thought, and that over a year ago we thought the Safe Banking Act has a chance to pass in a lame duck session,
Yeah.
especially if Democrats lose control of the Senate, and that's sort of become the consensus. So. But there's other barbs there that I wouldn't necessarily make if I was in control of our Twitter feed.
Got it. So in my book, I have a list of I think it's albums that I recommended. I know you took some you had some issues with some of my recommendations. I don't know if you
I got
remember
your book. I
or
got your
not.
book. I think I took notes.
So I'm just curious.
I
We can talk about it now. And I'm not saying that it was a perfect list. And by the way, these things can change because sometimes I'm listening to, I don't know, a Metallica album that I left off the list, and I'm like, man, that's a great album. Let's or a Stevie Wonder album or something. I'm just looking behind myself to remind me. So it could change.
Well, first of all, let me before I dissect this list, let me give you a compliment, which is it's been great to support your business. I think it is so differentiated and is going to be so much bigger than people think. And you're an amazing leader. I think what you're doing on the genetic side, on the formulation side, on the biometric monitoring side. I mean, that's really like something that we've been dreaming about and thinking about before we ever met you. Nobody is, tracking from, prescription and indication all the way through to the experience, and tracking all of that and understanding and making connections that'll be beneficial for research in the space and amongst so many other, beneficiaries. And you're the manifestation of that. So we're really excited. I bring this back to your book. I enjoyed reading the book.
I just wanted to say we're super grateful to be in business with you guys, and one of the main reasons why, because you get it. We've talked to so many different companies, and we have other investors that came in, and they don't get it. And everything you just talked about as sort of this trifecta and how does it fit in, and the medical and therapeutic aspects, that's the language we speak. So we're super grateful to have you guys as our business partners.
Yeah, and we're looking forward to giving you more money in the near future. So,
Thank you. Thank you.
I read the book cover to cover. I thought it was great. I thought it was honest. I think we were talking last week about the Huberman podcast, and we had some kind of. I'm a big fan of his podcast, but I think we both shared a lot of disagreement with how he framed cannabis as a medicine, and but the big takeaway that I had from that, and whether you agree with it or disagree with it, I think it's a good listen. But the big takeaway I had from that is that cannabis is really personal, and that's obviously the title of your book.
Yeah. And
it's true, like I take cannabis to go to the gym. My wife takes cannabis and she falls asleep within 2 seconds. It's just it is extremely personal, and so encourage people to check out the book. But in the back, as you originally asked, obviously you're a music fan. I'm a music fan. I go to a lot of concerts, maybe not as many as you do, and I can't see what T-shirt you're wearing today.
Oh, I have a special T-shirt for you. So this is a band called Bastard Jazz.
Oh yeah,
it's Les Claypool's band. And I was trying to figure out, being a bass player, I was trying to figure out which band. I was like, I have a Primus shirt somewhere, but this is more current. So I wore my Les Claypool Bastard Jazz shirt just for you.
Amazing. He's more talented than Les Claypool. I mean, obviously a very different style from most bass players. But so to go back to your list, you have in the back of your book, which if I ever wrote a book, I would do the same thing. I would put a book of my favorite albums, which for all the kids out there, yes, some of us listen to albums from start to finish, and you have some music to experience, your playlist, right, in album form, which I absolutely love. And interestingly enough, I think you and I are aligned in a lot of ways. A lot of these names I would have on my list. I probably wouldn't have as many, I don't have the same passion for rap, although I do love, in particular, 80s and early 90s rap. And, would be remiss if I didn't mention Paid in Full by Eric B. and Rakim, which is on your list. So I love that. But the two biggest issues I have, and it's not many, but the two biggest issues I have is, number one, my favorite band in the world is Radiohead.
Yeah. And
you have a Radiohead album on
yes,
here, but it's not the one that you would think, right? It's the Benz.
Yes.
And that is a great album, but when you compare it to the seminal albums that they came out with later, whether it's OK Computer or Kid A or In Rainbows, I'm just like, why go with the Benz? It's Kid A is personally my favorite. Kid A Amnesiac, but In Rainbows 2 is also amazing.
Well,
obviously
so
this is more guitar oriented.
I'll answer your question why. So here's my criteria. This is what I did. I did this a lot during lockdown of COVID. I have a room on my house. It's my music room. And what I would do is I would put in an album, consume some cannabis, and see if it evokes an emotion in me that'll cause me to draw or paint, because I also do that. And this album, I haven't listened to it in a long time. And this album really, I was like, wow, every song there is connecting with me. And like having Street Spirit, that it's such a beautiful song. So
it's so good.
I can't argue there are other albums, but in that moment in time, that's the one that connected to me.
Okay. Well, I won't fuss over it, because I'm just glad there's a Radiohead album on there. I'm also so happy that you picked my favorite Led Zeppelin album as your favorite Led Zeppelin album, of course, too. And but the one name that really stuck out, and I'm just gonna let you guess, because I'm sure other people have scratched their head. No, you want me to just tell you?
Yeah, tell me.
Sade.
Well, Sade?
I don't know how to pronounce it. Sade, the Ultimate Collection,
Yeah, Sade, you.
Smooth Operator.
Oh my God, what a beautiful album. All right, so tell me,
It just stuck out. It just
right,
stuck out
tell
as
me
like it
one
does
other
not fit
album,
with the rest.
one other album that sounds like that album. It's the most
Well,
unique album of its kind. And I'll tell you this, I know you're a married, happily married man with 3 kids, but you throw in some Sade on a date with a girl with some wine, maybe some cannabis. Man, there's nothing that gets the fire burning as a beautiful Sade album. And I've
Smooth
diverse
Operator,
taste in music, man. Diverse taste
you
in
are
music.
s- you are a smooth operator. I'll give you that. No, but I think, look, I mean, I gave you more compliments. I just thought
Thank you.
it was a great list.
All right, so I'll ask you. You're leaving the house. I don't know. Maybe I don't want to talk about natural disasters, but you have to grab 5 albums, and this is what you're going to listen to for a whole year, and you can only grab 5. What 5 albums would you grab?
Okay, my 5 albums. I already mentioned Kid A.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so Kid A for sure. Led
Mm-hmm.
Zeppelin 2 for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the I've thought about my death, and when I die, I would like. I don't want a ceremony. I don't want to be buried, but I just want the album Sigur Rós, open parentheses, close parentheses, or the No Name album played from start to finish. That's all I want.
Okay.
So that would be one. And it's the 20th anniversary of that album, so people don't know it. They should listen to it. And then let me think about this. Maybe, a little bit more modern, I would say um, uh, Alt J, I would say An Awesome Wave.
Okay.
Love that album. And my fifth would be, let's see, I would say um, we'll go we'll go old school, and we'll go with the band. The band.
The band. Great list. Can't argue that. All great albums. All right. So we come to the point in the program where I'm going to ask you some questions I ask all my guests. So, what has, so please describe your first experience with cannabis.
Let's see. My first experience with cannabis was a really boring story. High school, with my neighbor, and I think we ate frozen TV dinners. I think he had Stouffer's frozen TV dinners that we ate all night long. We listened to Digital Underground, and we played video games. And I thought initially I was losing my mind, and I thought this is the greatest thing in the world.
So you had a good experience. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's funny you brought up frozen dinner. So I'm a latchkey kid. I'm a little older than you, I think. But it's the same kind of thing. You come home, your parents aren't home, you do your thing. And my was frozen dinners. And I remember when I would get the Salisbury steak in that was just like a meal. It
Yeah.
was great. And then my parents would buy me frozen cheesesteak, like steakum steaks, I think, and I would make those
Oh
with
yeah.
the mozzarella. That was my meal until my parents get
Yeah.
home for dinner.
I,
Um,
I know you're not. I know you're not asking this, but I just want to add.
yeah, yeah.
I think I don't really. I don't think I really fell in love with the plant until college.
Yeah.
And there was a friend of mine who was from the West Coast and introduced me to um, Sublime. I'll probably add that to my list, and 311, and we would listen to that in our dorms. And anyways, long story short, and it ties to kind of why I'm so passionate about the industry and the medical benefits of the industry is he broke his neck between our freshman and sophomore year, and became a quadriplegic, but amazingly, like, was back in school in 6 months and graduated and had a very successful career. Passed away a few years ago, but really close friend of mine. And he used a lot of cannabis to deal with his situation, and you know and so in some ways I feel like I'm forwarding his legacy by supporting this industry and this plant. So anyways, I
Right.
wanted to add that.
No, thank you for sharing that. I mean, that's my passion. I mean, it's been my passion forever. And I don't mind consuming cannabis for, whatever purposes that you consume it for. But when I get when I get emails, phone calls, texts, meet people, and are saying, this is what happened to me and this is what cannabis did. I mean, it fuels you. And being an entrepreneur is difficult. Being an entrepreneur in the cannabis space is 10 times more difficult than being an
Yeah.
entrepreneur in other spaces. But when you're connected to that passion we were talking about, that's really what it's all about.
Yeah,
For,
and
for
look,
me.
you've helped countless people, and the talk you just gave, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention somebody that we both care about a lot, Dr. Deb Kimless, who works on the Merida platform, and she obviously had you told a story at the end of your talk, which I would encourage people to listen to, and
Thank you.
obviously you didn't name names, but just one of many examples, I'm sure, in your life where you've really impacted and helped people in need. So kudos to you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So being a big music guy, and we sort of just touched on this, but what was the very first concert that you ever attended?
So the first concert was the No Code Tour, Pearl Jam. I, I was a senior in college, very late in life. For I was a late bloomer in a lot of respects, but we'll leave that aside. But probably been to about 35 Pearl Jam shows, and the first one was in drove down from Philly to Maryland to watch them play, and it was awesome.
They had an incredible show with the Trocadero back in the day, and I saw them at Lollapalooza when they first started. So man, it was incredible. I remember I sort of turned around for a minute and I turned back and I got a big boot in my face because somebody was dropping somebody that was crowd surfing, and I had a big print of a boot in my face. But yeah,
Yeah.
what was the last concert you attended?
Let's see. The last concert I went to was Local Natives. An
Okay.
LA band came to the Man, and it's been probably 2 months since I've seen a show, which is a really long time. So I'm
Well,
due for
what
a
an
show soon.
amazing place, the Man. I forgot. I saw Metallica at the Man. They played for three
Whoa,
hours
that's
there. It was so incredible. It was one of my favorite shows. And I saw Stone Temple Pilots open up for the Spin Doctors, which is really odd. But the Spin Doctors are
wow.
really hot back in the day. Um, is there anything you're listening to today that is interesting that you want to introduce people to?
I love the music questions. Let's see. I re I, I love listening to new music. And I've gone through different channels to learn about new music. I used to listen to All Things Considered. I kind of graduated from that. It's an
Right.
NPR show hosted by Bob Boilen. But recently, I've been listening to a show hosted by Mike D of the Beastie Boys on Apple Music called The Echo Chamber.
Mm.
And, it just kind of mixes and melds old music that I've never heard before with new music that is up and coming,
Mm.
and international, which I don't have necessarily as much world exposure, versus kind of like what my sweet spot is, which is kind of the indie domestic scene.
Yeah.
Um, and a couple years ago, he spotlighted a band out of London, which is sort of like a, kind of acid jazz sort of band called The Comet Is Coming.
Hmm.
And I would encourage people to learn about that band. There's a saxophone player that he's involved in a bunch of bands, but his name is Shabaka Hutchings,
Mm.
and he's been involved in a lot of platforms. And then there's it's just a saxophone player, a drummer, who recently collaborated um, with the Smile, which is Tom York and Johnny Greenwood's side project.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Kind of a synth bass player, and it's just the three of them, and they just crush it. So that's kind of a new music scene that I've discovered recently. Is that kind of London acid jazz scene?
Super cool. I love that stuff. I just the band called More Chiba just performed last night here, and that's old school kind of acid jazz type of band from back in the day. Um, it's
Yeah, and
funny. Yeah, go ahead.
if you want an album recommendation, specifically, they just came out with a new album, but I would suggest people start with Trust in the Life Force of the Deep Mystery.
Wow. All right. That's it's funny you were saying hemp clothing and all that stuff. So I went Sunday. I went to see the Cult, and the Cult had their T-shirt, and then you can buy their T-shirt in hemp. So I was like, super cool. You can buy like merch that's now made with hemp, and bands are promoting that as hemp, charging $10 more for it, but hopefully it'll be less at some point.
Just interesting side note there, which is my brother-in-law sent me a picture of the my wife makes fun of me because, and I'm sure like you, when I go to concerts, my guilty pleasure is to buy concert tees. And I feel bad that I didn't wear a concert tee today. I didn't think about it, but my brother-in-law sent me I guess uh, the apparel for the band The National, which of course and their latest apparel is a shirt that just says "Sad Dad," and I thought to myself, I've been to a lot of National shows. I kind of outgrew them, and I feel like a little better about myself. Yeah, so if I were to go to that concert and see a T-shirt that just said "Sad Dads," I would feel terrible.
That's funny. Yeah, I'm addicted to that. I have hundreds, I think, of concert tees. So I'm running out of room at some point. And I was leaving when I was getting my divorce, and I was leaving my house. I left a bag of clothes, and my ex-wife donated them. And I had a bag of T-shirts, like from I used to work at Tower Records, and they're all gone. Like T-shirts with a band called Citizen Dick is the one that stands out, which is from the band from Singles that now I went to eBay and they're selling it for like $300-400. So whatever. I'll try to replace it. Oh, one more
Great
thing that you
movie.
just said. Great movie.
Great
And
movie.
speaking of Mike D, I'm listening to the Beastie Boys book right now on Audible.
I did.
Fantastic.
I read the book. I listened to it. Both completely different experiences. Would encourage everyone to do that.
Oh yeah, because they got guest readers basically. It's
Yeah.
fantastic.
Well,
So
I'll give a book recommendation,
okay.
which is there's an oral history. Trying to find it, but there's an oral history of the grunge scene in Seattle, and it's called, I don't see it, but it's called um, Everything's All Right, or Our Town's All Right.
I'm writing it
I'll
down.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
it's excellent if
Let
you
me
like oral
know.
histories.
I love all that stuff, and I love grunge music, and all those bands were actually a band called Afghan Wigs is playing tonight. If you remember that
Oh,
from
great band.
back in the day. What has cannabis meant in your life?
um for me, it's meant helping other people first. um I have a personal relationship with it. I probably consume. I'm not a big consumer. I'm kind of what you would call a lightweight, but I'm more of a functional consumer. I typically, again, I think I mentioned this earlier, but typically use it to go to the gym, to be athletic, maybe sometimes to play the guitar, um, but for me, first and foremost, it's helping other people and bringing relief to their pains. And I feel very fortunate that I don't really suffer from anything other than stress, and it shouldn't be discounted. But to help a chemo patient, which I've done numerous times, and help them to deal with chemotherapy, and to have stimulate an appetite, to help you know uh, family members sleep better. I joke about how my Irish Italian Catholic family, they thought I was crazy when I got into this space, and now they instead of praying before they go to sleep, they pop a gummy that I gave to them. So it's really about helping people more than anything. And now my new passion project you know is the sustainability aspects of the industry. I think the industry has been uh, hasn't been very sustainable to date. You think about indoor grows that use a lot of energy. You think about you know all the packaging waste in the space, but this plant has the ability to turn that paradigm on its head in a big way. And so, it's kind of, multifaceted, but for me, um, in an effort to, address climate change, and I think hemp is going to be a big part of it. So,
Yeah, and I agree with you. And if you, I think they planted hemp in Chernobyl to help clean up the environment based on from the Chernobyl disaster that happened. So there's so many versatilities, and why not use hemp packaging for hemp and cannabis products? It makes no sense that we should
yeah,
standardize in that.
it's interesting, actually. One of our portfolio companies, you mentioned Chernobyl. Chernobyl is now actually, you know, located within the Ukraine, and
Right.
one of our portfolio companies, they process hemp and in northern Alberta, and all their genetics come from the Ukraine. So they
Yeah.
were actually sneaking seeds across the border into Polish territory
Yeah.
as the war was going on, and were able to get those seeds over to Canada. And that happens to be, obviously it's the breadbasket of Europe, but it happens to be the home of the best hemp genetics in the world.
Absolutely. 100% agree.
Yeah.
Glad you brought that up. All right. So, final bonus question. Describe what your room looked like growing up.
Oh, my room. Okay. I had a bunch of posters on the wall. And the one, I had a poster of, um, the early days of Pearl Jam and Eddie Vedder. I'm sure you've seen it. I think he was playing in Seattle, and he's about 25 feet in the air, hanging from a metal, kind of outrig,
Yeah.
with the band playing down below, and thousands of people watching him. And so that one. But I think the poster that I guess I'm, um, you know, most fond of, or remember the most, was Charles Barkley dunking a ball with Godzilla in the background, because he was in some advertisement with Godzilla for one of his sneakers. And I, was obsessed with Charles growing up. And if you want to break into my house, and 34 is part of the code. And just love the guy to death. And
Have you ever met Charles Barkley?
I met him once. It's actually a funny story. He insulted my sister-in-law, and I just kind of laughed it off because I was so starstruck. And my sister-in-law will never let me forget it. The other person I met, which which I was, I don't get starstruck much, but the other person that I met and this is a good story, maybe to end on, unless you have another question, but the in 2008, I made a road trip to St. Louis to watch the Phillies play at it was the New Busch Stadium at the time. And I met, I was in an elevator in the hotel we were staying at. And, the elevator's going down and it stops and the doors open. And who walks in but Harry Callis?
Wow.
And Harry Callis, for people that don't know, was the voice of the Philadelphia Phillies growing up, and kind of was like a constant soundtrack in my head growing up, and and was the voice of NFL films. I mean, his voice was just you've heard it, you've heard his name, you've heard his voice, whether you know the name or not. Let's just put it that way. And he walks in the elevator, and it's 2008, and I said, I don't usually bother celebrities, but I'm a big fan, Mr. Callis, and it's just such an honor to meet you, and I can't believe I'm sharing an elevator with you, or something like that. And he turned to me and he said, well, it could be a special year. And then the elevators opened and he walked out, and I stayed in the elevator, even though we got to the lobby and that's where I was getting out, and the doors closed and it started going up again because I just lost my mind. And as it would turn out, obviously the Phillies went on to win that 2008 World Series, and he called the World Series. And who was calling the World Series? We played Tampa Bay in the World Series, and who was announcing for Tampa Bay but his son. So it was very special for him for multiple reasons, right? And then the next year he unfortunately passed away. But it was that was my sorry for all the tangents, but I figured you would appreciate that
Brush
story.
for celebrity. That's beautiful. I love that. All right. So, where, I don't know if you want people to get in touch with you or not, or go to Merida's website, but if somebody wants to contact, or they have investment opportunities, or want to connect, where can they do so?
Yeah. So Merida's website's a great place to start. There's, I think it's info@meridacap.com. I'm on LinkedIn, Mina Mishrikey, and those are probably the two best channels to reach out. And we're here to grow this industry, and couldn't be more excited about the future.
Well, thank you so much for doing this, and thank you for being an investor and a partner and just an advocate for what we do. And I'm truly grateful. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Lynn.